June 22, 1941.
7:42 AM.
Eastern Front, open plains beyond the Orsha sector. The German advance line is still moving forward when the sky suddenly folds in sound. There is no warning this time. No build-up, no distant rumble of artillery. Just a sudden, violent tearing noise from the horizon, like the air itself is being ripped apart. Then the rockets arrive. Not one wave, not two, but a full saturation barrage. The ground ahead of the German formation detonates in a continuous chain of explosions, stretching across kilometers of battlefield in a single instant. It is not targeted at units, it is targeted at entire geography. Hills disappear in smoke. Tree lines are erased, roads collapse into burning trenches of earth, and the German advance simply stops. For the first time since Operation Barbarossa began, momentum breaks. Not because of resistance in the traditional sense, but because the battlefield itself becomes uninhabitable. German armored units attempt to reposition. Tanks reverse under pressure. Infantry scatter into fragmented cover, but there is nowhere safe to regroup. Every fixed point becomes a potential impact zone. The Katyusha rockets do not chase targets. They erase areas of existence. Inside a German armored column, a panzer commander opens his hatch just long enough to see it. The horizon is no longer a line. It is a burning wall. He doesn't shout orders immediately. He just stares because what he is seeing does not match anything in his training, his doctrine, or his expectations of war. Then, quietly, into the radio. This is not artillery support. Repeat, this is not artillery. His voice breaks slightly at the end. The Soviet batteries fire again and again. The intervals between salvos are almost clinical.
No hesitaste.
Just timed destruction delivered with mechanical precision. Each launch adds another layer to the chaos. And yet, from the Soviet perspective, it is controlled, efficient, even restrained. German infantry units begin to collapse under the psychological weight more than the physical damage. Because the terrifying truth becomes clear. There is no safe distance, no pattern to predict, no formation that guarantees survival. One soldier watches a previous impact zone, already burning, already destroyed, get struck again. And again, as if the land itself is being punished repeatedly. He turns to his comrade and whispers, "They are not missing, they are correcting." Far behind Soviet lines, Katyusha crews operate in synchronized silence. Trucks reposition after each firing sequence. Reloading is fast, practiced, almost ritualistic.
No shouting, no confusion.
Just motion. Commander checks his watch, nods once. Next grid, and the forest responds again. German high command attempts emergency countermeasures. Artillery coordinates are plotted. Counter-battery fire is ordered, but there is nothing stable enough to strike back at. The enemy is not a point. It is a pattern, a moving storm of fire that appears, strikes, and disappears before retaliation can even calculate. By mid-morning, entire sections of the German forward push are no longer operational. Not defeated in battle, erased from coordination. Supply lines are burning, communication relays are down, units are fragmented into isolated pockets of survival. And every surviving officer is now forced to accept a new reality. This war has introduced something they did not prepare for. A weapon that changes the definition of battlefield control. As smoke rises across the Eastern Front, the sun becomes a dim red disk behind layered ash clouds. And somewhere in that smoke, more launchers are already moving. Reloaded, repositioned, ready for the next order. Because this is not the end of the barrage. It is only the beginning of something the German army cannot yet stop, and cannot yet understand. June 22, 1941.
9:15 AM.
German Army Group Center Command Line, Eastern Front. A single radio transmission comes through, and no one dares to repeat it out loud. By mid-morning, something more dangerous than destruction has taken hold of the German advance. Uncertainty inside the command structure itself. Orders that used to travel cleanly from headquarters to frontline units now arrive fragmented, delayed, or not at all. But worse than the communication breakdown is what is being communicated. Reports of entire sectors being deleted, armored formations disappearing under invisible fire patterns, and repeated references to a weapon no one can visually confirm for more than seconds at a time. Katyusha rocket artillery is now no longer just a battlefield threat. It is becoming a psychological rupture inside the German war machine. At a forward command post, General Oberst Fedor von Bock listens in silence as situation reports are read aloud. Every few minutes, another officer enters with a new update, each one worse than the last. Finally, a senior staff officer places a message on the table without speaking. The paper is already smudged with dirt and sweat. Von Bock reads it once, then again, no reaction, but his hand tightens slightly on the edge of the map table. The report simply states, forward momentum cannot be sustained under current bombardment conditions. Units are unable to establish stable formations. Enemy fire is continuous, mobile, and untraceable. Untraceable. That word repeats in the room like an accusation. Outside the bunker, the battlefield continues to pulse with distant detonations. Not constant, not predictable, but enough to remind everyone that silence does not mean safety. A young signals officer leans against a wooden post, trying to maintain radio contact with a forward division. He hears static, then screaming, then nothing. He lowers the receiver slowly, realizing there is no point calling again. German armored units attempt localized advances to regain initiative. Small, aggressive pushes designed to break through perceived Soviet firing zones. But every attempt triggers immediate saturation strikes. Not delayed, not reactive, almost preemptive, as if the battlefield is being read before it is fully written. One Panzer commander records in his after-action report, "It felt as if the enemy knew where we intended to be before we arrived there." Inside infantry units, morale begins to fracture in subtle ways first. Not panic yet, but hesitation. Soldiers stop trusting terrain. They stop trusting silence. They begin to watch the sky more than the horizon, because the threat is no longer visible in front of them. It is overhead and everywhere. Farther back, intelligence officers begin compiling early analytical summaries. They attempt classification. Heavy artillery? No, too mobile. Air-delivered rockets? No aircraft observed. Sabotage? Impossible at this scale. Experimental weapon system? Unconfirmed. The conclusion section of one document remains blank for hours, until someone finally writes, "Unknown system, high saturation rocket artillery, operational psychology impact severe," then pauses, adds one more line, "Command confidence degraded." That phrase becomes more important than any casualty figure, because wars are not only won by firepower. They are sustained by belief in control, and that belief is now cracking. Meanwhile, Soviet Katyusha crews continue their cycle without interruption. Reposition, reload, fire, move again.
No hesitation.
No discussion, just execution. The weapon is not treated as miraculous by those operating it. It is treated as functional, reliable, another tool in a rapidly evolving war. But what it represents on the German side is something else entirely. A force that cannot be pinned down, cannot be anticipated, cannot be countered with doctrine alone. As the sun rises higher, the battlefield is no longer a line of engagement. It is a shifting map of destruction zones, overlapping and expanding. German commanders begin to realize a difficult truth. This is not a battle they can simply push through. It is a system they do not yet understand. And systems like this do not get defeated quickly. They get studied, or they break armies first. And somewhere deep in the Soviet rear, another order is being prepared. A larger one, a wider one that will stretch across an even greater portion of the front line. And when it arrives, everything the Germans think they understand about artillery will change again, permanently. June 22nd, 1941.
11:30 a.m.
Somewhere near the Dnieper River crossings, a German reconnaissance officer raises his binoculars and sees the horizon collapse into fire again. By late morning, the German advance is no longer moving with confidence. It is moving in fragments. Entire battalions are no longer acting as unified forces. Instead, they operate as isolated survival clusters, reacting to whatever comes first: terrain, visibility, or the next unseen barrage. And the worst part, there is no rhythm to it anymore. The Katyusha strikes are no longer spaced like traditional artillery. They arrive in unpredictable bursts, sometimes seconds apart, sometimes minutes, sometimes overlapping across multiple sectors at once. The battlefield has stopped behaving like a battlefield. It now behaves like a system of sudden, violent interruptions. A German forward observer team sets up on a ridge overlooking a suspected Soviet position. They expect to identify firing batteries, coordinates, movement patterns. Instead, they see nothing. Just forest, just silence. Then, without warning, the forest erupts. A full salvo launches from concealed positions deeper within the treeline, rockets arcing upward in near-perfect synchronization. The observer barely has time to shout into his field radio before the sky fills with descending trails of fire. And the ridge they were standing on disappears in smoke. German doctrine collapses in small, almost invisible ways first. Artillery counter-battery fire is ordered, but there is no stable target to respond to. Infantry coordination is attempted, but units cannot hold position long enough to synchronize. Even communication begins to lose meaning. One intercepted transmission simply repeats, "Request confirmation of enemy position." There is no answer, because there is no fixed enemy position. Inside higher command, tension turns into urgency. Maps are constantly being updated, but the updates lag behind reality. Red zones expand faster than they can be drawn. Entire grid sectors become unusable within minutes of being marked. An operations officer finally snaps, throwing his pencil onto the table. This is not a front line anymore. No one disagrees. Meanwhile, on the ground, German soldiers begin to experience something new in modern warfare. Anticipation fear, not fear of what is visible, but fear of what might happen next. They stop moving in predictable formations. They avoid open ground entirely. Even pauses feel dangerous because stillness has become indistinguishable from target acquisition. One soldier writes later, "You didn't wait for orders. You waited for silence and then prayed it stayed silent." The Katyusha strikes continue shaping the terrain itself. What once were villages are now fragmented outlines of structures. Roads are cut into broken segments. River crossings become unstable zones where no concentration of troops is allowed to gather for long. The weapon is not just destroying forces. It is rewriting geography into danger patterns. A Soviet battery commander observes the battlefield through binoculars from a concealed position.
No celebration.
No emotional reaction, just assessment. He marks positions on a map with calm precision, then signals for the next adjustment. The efficiency is almost unsettling, because for him this is not chaos. It is controlled fire distribution. German intelligence finally produces a partial classification update. Katyusha rocket artillery, high mobility, multi-launch saturation system, but the final line of the report undercuts even that clarity. Operational effect exceeds doctrinal explanation. In simpler terms, we understand what it is. We do not understand what it is doing to us. As noon approaches, the battlefield stretches wider than before. Engagement zones overlap across kilometers. Smoke layers stack into a permanent haze over the Eastern Front, and still the rockets continue. Not endlessly, but consistently enough that no German formation can ever fully regroup without risk. Something fundamental is shifting now. The Germans are no longer advancing through resistance. They are advancing through uncertainty itself. And uncertainty, unlike soldiers, does not retreat, spreads. Far beyond the visible front line, more Soviet units prepare to expand the firing range. Larger grids, broader coverage, deeper saturation, because what has been tested here is only the opening phase. And the next stage will force the German command to confront something far more difficult than firepower. It will force them to confront the limits of their own understanding. And that realization is coming faster than anyone expects. If these rockets could break the German army in a single day, then what would happen when the Soviets finally learned how to use them perfectly? June 22, 1941, 2:05 p.m., Eastern Front, Army Group Center Sector. A German staff officer erases a line on the map, then realizes the line never mattered in the first place. By early afternoon, something quiet but irreversible is happening inside the German command structure. Not defeat, not collapse. Something more dangerous to a military system built on precision. Doctrinal failure. Everything the Wehrmacht had built its early war success on: careful coordination, artillery planning, timed infantry advances, controlled armored thrusts, depends on one assumption: that the battlefield can be measured, but the Katyusha system refuses measurement. A German operations briefing is underway inside a reinforced field headquarters. Officers stand around layered maps marked with red pencil corrections that are already outdated. One officer points to a sector. "We establish counter-battery fire here." Another immediately responds, "There is no fixed enemy artillery here." Pause. Then more firmly, "Then where is it?" No one answers, because the honest answer is becoming impossible to say. Everywhere and nowhere at once. On the ground, German armored units attempt a coordinated push to regain initiative near a disrupted Soviet line. For a brief moment, it appears to work. Tanks advance through partially cleared terrain. Infantry follows behind. Then the silence breaks. Not gradually, instantly. A full Katyusha salvo saturates the entire advance corridor. The lead vehicles are struck first, then the center, then the rear. There is no front of the attack. There is only the space it occupies. And in less than a minute, the formation ceases to exist as a formation. A surviving tank commander later describes it in a report. "We were not engaged in sequence. We were engaged simultaneously." That sentence confuses staff officers more than it helps them, because traditional war expects order. This delivers simultaneity. German commanders begin issuing increasingly desperate instructions. Do not cluster units. Do not hold static positions. Advance only under reconnaissance cover. Maintain dispersion at all times. But every instruction clashes with another requirement: to actually take ground, because dispersion reduces vulnerability, but also destroys offensive capability. And this is where the system begins to fail itself. Inside the Soviet firing network, Katyusha units continue their cycle. But now something important is happening. The coordination is scaling. Batteries are no longer acting in isolation. They are firing in layered sequences across wider sectors, overlapping impact zones to create sustained denial areas. Not just destruction. Control of movement. A Soviet officer traces a map with a pencil, marking zones as inactive corridors. Not destroyed, not occupied, simply unusable. German intelligence officers begin to realize the implication. This is no longer about destroying units. It is about shaping what movement is possible. And if movement can be shaped, then initiative itself can be controlled. Back at headquarters, a senior German general finally speaks what others have avoided. This is not artillery support. He pauses, staring at the map where entire divisions are now represented as fragmented symbols. This is area denial at operational scale. The room goes silent because the implication is clear. If the battlefield can be denied faster than it can be occupied, then traditional offensive warfare begins to collapse. Outside, the sound returns again. Distant, layered, approaching in waves. The Katyusha launch signature is now familiar to every soldier on the front, but familiarity does not reduce its impact. If anything, it increases dread, because now they recognize it before it arrives. And recognition does not allow escape. A young German infantryman writes in his pocket notebook, "At first we feared the explosions. Now we fear the silence before them." The battlefield is no longer just active. It is conditioned. Every movement is constrained. Every pause is dangerous. Every advance is temporary. And somewhere in that reality, German command begins to understand a hard truth. They are no longer shaping the battle. They are reacting to it. And reaction in war is always a step behind. Far to the east, Soviet units prepare another expansion of firing sectors. The scale is increasing. The reach is widening. And what began as a shock on the first morning of Operation Barbarossa is now becoming something much larger than anyone expected at the start. A system that does not just strike the enemy, but decides how the enemy is allowed to move. And the German commanders are about to realize what happens when that system reaches its full coordination. June 22, 1941, 4:40 p.m. Eastern Front, near shattered German forward lines. A radio operator hears a familiar sound in the distance and immediately drops the receiver, because now he knows what comes next. By late afternoon, the nature of the Katyusha threat has evolved in the minds of German commanders. At first, they believed it was simply mobile artillery. Then they believed it was coordinated saturation fire. Now, After hours of repeated strikes across shifting sectors, a darker understanding begins to take shape. It is not just a weapon system. It is a battlefield control network. German reconnaissance reports begin to show a disturbing pattern. Wherever German units attempt concentration, fire follows shortly after. Not always immediately, not always predictably, but consistently enough that commanders stop believing in coincidence. One intelligence officer circles a pattern on a map with increasing urgency. This is not reactive fire. Another responds. Then what is it? No answer is recorded. On the ground, the psychological pressure reaches a new level. Soldiers no longer treat movement as neutral. Every regrouping feels suspicious. Every pause feels exposed. Even success feels temporary. A German NCO watches his squad briefly secure a position along a tree line. They begin to relax just for a moment. Then the sound arrives again. That rising, layered scream from beyond the horizon. His voice breaks as he shouts, "Down!" But there is no time to complete the command. The rockets are already there. The impact zone is not a point. It is a strip. A corridor of destruction that sweeps across the ground in overlapping detonations, forcing units to scatter in all directions at once. When the smoke clears, the position is no longer usable. Not because it is destroyed completely, but because it is unstable terrain for survival. German commanders begin issuing a new category of orders. Do not assume static safety anywhere. This is unprecedented. Because war has always relied on temporary safety zones, rear positions, staging areas, regroup points. Now even those are unreliable. Inside Soviet lines, Katyusha units continue to shift position with efficiency. Trucks move, halt briefly, fire, then disappear into new concealment routes. The system is simple in structure, but devastating in effect. A Soviet artillery coordinator marks another firing sequence on his map.
Neumotion.
Just timing. Next coordinated wave in 5 minutes. German air reconnaissance attempts to locate firing sources intensify. Aircraft sweep over suspected zones. They find fragments, smoke trails, temporary positions, quickly abandoned trucks. But nothing stable, nothing targetable, and every pass becomes increasingly dangerous as anti-air awareness increases alongside rocket deployment coordination. Pilots begin reporting something unusual. It feels like the ground is responding to us. Back at German headquarters, exhaustion begins to replace urgency. Not physical exhaustion alone, cognitive exhaustion, because every model they construct fails within minutes. Every assumption collapses under the next barrage. A staff officer finally says what many are beginning to think. We are not fighting a predictable enemy. He hesitates, then continues, we are fighting a system that adapts faster than we can document it. Outside, the sky darkens, not from nightfall but from smoke accumulation. Layers of fire residue, dust, and burned debris create a ceiling over the battlefield. And within that ceiling, every new rocket launch is visible long before impact. A rising streak of light, a second of silence. Then destruction. German infantry begin to describe it differently now. Not as artillery, not even as rockets, but as arrivals. Because each strike feels less like an attack and more like an event that simply happens to the space they occupy. And somewhere deep in the Soviet rear, the system is preparing something larger. Not just another barrage, but a broader synchronization across multiple firing groups, covering sectors that, until now, had remained outside full saturation range. The expansion is deliberate, measured, calculated, and once it begins, the Germans will no longer be dealing with localized shock fire. They will be dealing with something closer to a continuous operational storm. The kind of storm that does not stop when armies move. It moves with them. And as the sun begins to lower over a burning eastern front, German commanders are forced to confront a terrifying possibility. This is no longer a battle they can escape by maneuver, because wherever they move next, the system may already be waiting. June 22, 1941, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Front, collapsing German forward sector near Orsha. A German courier arrives at headquarters, but the message he carries is already outdated before it is read. By evening, The Eastern Front is no longer defined by advance or retreat. It is defined by survivability. German units are still technically moving forward in some sectors. In others, they are falling back, but none of it follows a coherent operational plan anymore, because the battlefield itself is no longer stable enough to support planning. Inside a forward command bunker, officers crowd around a map that has become almost unreadable. Red markings overlap so densely that entire divisions blur into uncertainty. A senior staff officer finally draws a line across a sector. "We stabilize here." No one responds immediately, because stabilize has become a questionable word. Outside, the sound returns again, the now familiar rising scream of rockets cutting through the evening sky. But this time, something is different. The barrage is not isolated. It is layered across multiple directions: north, south, deep rear positions, forward concentrations. It is not a single strike anymore. It is a networked eruption. German infantry caught in exposed positions begin to experience a new kind of warfare fatigue. Not just fear of explosions, but exhaustion from anticipation, because the unpredictability itself has become constant. A soldier collapses beside a shallow trench, covering his ears even when nothing is falling. His comrade asks him if he is wounded. He shakes his head. "I just can't wait for it anymore." At the command level, a difficult realization begins to form. The issue is no longer tactical superiority. It is operational denial. Every attempt to mass forces results in immediate suppression. Every attempt to spread forces reduces effectiveness. Every attempt to move creates exposure. There is no configuration that guarantees advantage. A German colonel finally expresses it during a briefing, his voice low and controlled. "We are being forced into a battlefield that does not allow us to organize ourselves." That sentence hangs in the room longer than any explosion outside. Meanwhile, Soviet Katyusha units continue executing synchronized firing cycles across expanded grids. The coordination is becoming more refined, not random, not chaotic, but increasingly structured in timing and coverage. Each battery is part of a wider orchestration, a system of fire that shapes movement corridors, denies crossings, and forces German units into predictable reaction patterns. And those patterns are being exploited. German reconnaissance confirms something troubling. Every attempted regrouping leads to follow-up strikes, not always immediate, but consistently delayed just enough to catch formations mid-adjustment. It is not brute force. It is timed pressure. Inside German command, frustration begins to turn into something more dangerous. Doubt in leadership itself. Orders are questioned not out of insubordination, but out of survival instinct. One officer quietly says, "If we move, we are targeted. If we stay, we are targeted." No one disagrees. As dusk settles, smoke thickens across the entire front. Visibility drops. Coordination becomes harder. And yet, the Katyusha strikes do not stop. They become even more psychologically dominant in low light, because now they arrive as sound first, vision second. The scream comes before the impact, always. A German soldier later describes the evening like this: "It was not night falling on us. It was fire continuing into darkness. And in that darkness, something fundamental changes. The German army is no longer trying to defeat an enemy force. It is trying to survive an environment shaped by that force. A shift that military doctrine is not designed to handle. Because doctrine assumes enemies can be located. This one cannot. Doctrine assumes pressure is finite. Request clarification of operational objective. Current position untenable under sustained saturation fire. No identifiable enemy front line present. The message is signed, but the signature is almost unnecessary, because by now, every unit is experiencing the same condition. Inside the headquarters, silence begins to replace discussion. Not acceptance, not calm, but something closer to cognitive overload. An officer leans over the map table and traces a long line across multiple sectors, then stops. "There is no line anymore," he says quietly. No one corrects him. Meanwhile, Soviet Katyusha coordination continues its expansion into night operations. The firing rhythm changes slightly, less frequent in some sectors, more concentrated in others. It is not random, it is adaptive, designed to maintain pressure without overextending ammunition cycles, while still preventing German regrouping. The battlefield is being actively managed, not just attacked. Managed. German infantry units begin reporting a new condition in night combat. Loss of spatial certainty. Even familiar terrain becomes unreliable under repeated bombardment and smoke layering. Landmarks disappear. Orientation becomes guesswork. One soldier writes, "We stopped knowing where we were. We only knew where we were not safe." At higher command, a final realization begins to surface among experienced officers. This is no longer a battle of initiative. It is a battle of control density. Whoever can maintain structured pressure across space dictates movement. And at this moment, the Germans are losing that structure faster than they can rebuild it. A senior general finally asks the question no one has been willing to voice clearly. How do you counter something that does not stay where you can counter it? No answer follows. Only the sound of distant explosions rolling across the night. Outside, the battlefield is no longer visible in full. It is operating in layered coordination across expanded front segments, creating overlapping denial zones that stretch German mobility to its limits. This is no longer tactical harassment, it is operational shaping. Inside German headquarters, the tone of communication changes. Less certainty, more fragmentation. Orders are shortened, hesitations increase. Clarifications replace directives. Even language itself begins to reflect uncertainty. Attempt advance, if possible, replaces advance. Hold, if conditions allow, replaces hold. Every sentence now contains escape clauses, because certainty has become dangerous. And yet, the Soviet side remains calm. Katyusha units continue their cycle with precision. Trucks reposition through forest routes. Crews reload. Timers are checked. Launch sequences are coordinated.
No panique. No confusión.
Just execution of a system designed to maintain pressure without exposing fixed vulnerability. German commanders now face a conclusion they cannot avoid. This is not a weapon that can be countered with a single decisive action. Because there is no single target, there is no single front, there is only distributed fire influence across time and space. A final situation report is drafted for higher command, contains no dramatic language. Just assessment. Enemy rocket artillery has achieved sustained operational disruption across multiple sectors. Conventional advanced procedures are no longer viable under current conditions. The final line is left and signed for several minutes. Then added, recommendation, reassessment of offensive timelines. As dawn light slowly returns over the Eastern Front, smoke still hangs over broken terrain. Burned forests, disrupted roadways, fragmented unit positions. But more important than the physical damage is what has already changed. The German army can no longer assume control over movement on this battlefield. And in modern warfare, loss of movement control is often the first step toward larger collapse. Far beyond the front lines, Soviet Katyusha crews complete another cycle and begin repositioning again. The system does not pause to reflect, continues adjusting, expanding, refining, because what emerged on June 22nd was not just a new weapon on the battlefield. It was a new principle of warfare, that mobility, coordination, and concentration could be systematically denied across entire operational sectors through rapid, mobile saturation fire. And for the German commanders watching their advance stall under this pressure, one realization begins to settle in. This is no longer a battle they can simply push through with momentum. It is a battlefield that has been redesigned in real time, by fire they cannot locate fast enough to destroy. And as the Eastern Front continues to burn into a new day, one question remains unanswered inside every command post. If this is only the beginning, what happens when it escalates further? What if this kind of warfare never really ended, and only evolved into something we still don't fully understand today? Tell me in the comments, was Katyusha just a weapon or the beginning of a new kind of war? And if you want more stories where history feels this real, make sure to subscribe, hit like, and turn on notifications, because the next story might be even more unbelievable than this one.